Thank you, Mr. President. Before I proceed, Mr. President, may I seek the permission of the Chair to allow my staff to bring in projectors and screens for our visual aid.
Mr. President, may we have a minute
Suspended.
suspended?
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, today I rise on a matter of personal and collective privilege. 2 years ago, the country was caught in a political maelstrom brought about by revelations arising from the voice tapes taken of a man and a woman, the identities of whom have since been laid public. It all started when on June 6, 2005, no less than Press Secretary Ignacio Bunye, in his office in Malacanang itself, bared two compact disc recordings. One, probably real, the other, obviously doctored, where a man and a woman's conversations were quite audible.
So will I still lead by more than 1 M?
The resulting uproar reached higher decibels when 3 days after a press conference was held in Makati City by the former Deputy Director of the National Bureau of Investigation, Attorney Samuel Ong, who claimed to have the master tape of the mysterious voice recordings with highly indecent conversations relative to the 2004 presidential elections. In that press conference was presented the story of how operatives of the Intelligence Service Armed Forces of the Philippines tapped the cell phone conversations of several people, including some very powerful personages in and out of the current administration. As you will see in the succeeding presentation, Mr. President, it was not just Virgilio Garciliano who became the subject of intense technical surveillance operations by the ISAF. There were many more from both sides of the political fence. Central to the revelations of Attorney Samuel Ong was the persona of Vidal Doble Jr., the man who was supposed to tell the nation how the cell phone conversations of the high and the mighty were eavesdropped upon and recorded for posterity. Unfortunately for the Filipino people, that was not to be. For 2 years and running, the nation has been kept in the dark about the truth behind Hello Garci, because the man who knew how conversations were illegally tapped for political and other purposes could not speak out. His family was kidnapped in Kidapawan, North Cotabato, brought to Manila, detained in the basement of the official residence of the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines inside Camp Aguinaldo, Quezon City, to which he himself was to be brought later. Thus was his silence on the issue guaranteed by the terror of fear for his family. When he was hailed before the House of Representatives as a resource person, Vidal Doble Jr. was obviously not a free man. In an effort, Mr. President, to seek closure to an issue that continues to hound the politics of this nation with repercussions on the legitimacy of the mandate of the present leadership, I present today the sworn statement of Vidal Doble Jr., who has finally found the courage of his convictions and will tell the people through us in this august chamber freely the whole unvarnished truth, the whats, whens, wheres, whos, whys, and hows of the Hello Garci tapes. With your indulgence, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, please allow me to share with you some excerpts from Doble's testimony.
Dati po akong sundalo na-assign sa Intelligence Service Armed Forces of the Philippines sa unit ng Military Intelligence Group 21.
Ano po itong Military Intelligence Group 21?
Military Intelligence Group 21, ito ang technical group ng ISAP.
Ano po yung position nyo naman ho dito sa Military Intelligence Group na ito?
Bali po ako ang dating non-commissioned officer in charge o team leader ng wire section.
Kailan po kayo unang na-assign dito sa MiG-21, Sir Doble?
I was assigned in MiG-21 sometime March of 1994.
At nung nasa MiG-21 pa kayo, ano yung natatandaan yung project or operations ng grupo nyo?
Nagkaroon po kami ng project dyan na kung tawagin ay Project Lighthouse.
Itong Project Lighthouse na ito, ano ang mission ng project na ito?
Bali, create ito para ma-monitor ang iba't ibang personalities, lalong-lalo na yung mga against sa Arroyo administration.
Sino yung mga personalities na monitor ng Project Lighthouse?
Ito nga yung si late FPJ, Horacio Boy Morales, Res Cortez, Magdalo Group, Gringo Hunasan.
Nabanggit mo, Mr. Doble, itong Magdalo Group. Sino-sino sa Magdalo Group ang naging target ng Project Lighthouse?
Bali sila Captain at ngayon ay elected senator na si Antonio Trillanes, Captain Peldon, Captain Gambala, Captain Maestra Campo.
At sino-sino naman ang bumubuo nitong Project Lighthouse?
Bali 14 kami dyan na puro sundalo na kinuha ni Captain Ribong.
At sino ang leader nyo sa Project Lighthouse?
Bali ang pinaka-leader namin o pinuno ay ang dati namin group commander na si Colonel Paul Sumayo, Captain Frederick Ribong, Captain Lindsay Rex Sagi.
Okay. Itong mga officers na nabanggit mo, lahat ba sila ay member ng anong unit?
Si Captain Sumayo po ay wala na ngayon sa ISAP. Si Captain Ribong, ang pagkakaalam ko, ay nag-schooling abroad. Si Captain Sagi naman ay nasa MiG-21 pa rin.
Okay. Itong Project Lighthouse na ito, ilang teams ito? Kung tatanda mo pa.
Bali, 4 na teams kami dyan.
At saang aling team ka naging member?
Bali, napabilang ako sa Team 2 na ang team leader namin ay si Master Sergeant Alex Villedo at yung isang kasama ko pa ay si Technical Sergeant Ariel Pitate ng Philippine Air Force.
Ikwento mo nga kung paano naging proseso nyo sa pag-monitor ng mga target personalities sa Project Lighthouse.
Yun nga, binigyan kami ng units na 3600 ni Captain Ribong na may capability ng mag-monitor ng mga tawag.
At nung pag-monitor ninyo, puro mga opposition personalities lang na nabanggit mo, sila lang yung minonitor ng Project Lighthouse?
Meron din pong sa administration, katulad ng kay Michael Defensor.
At si Mike Defensor, minonitor nyo rin sa Lighthouse.
Opo.
Sino pa ibang na-monitor nyo sa Project Lighthouse?
Yun na nga si dating Comelec Commissioner Virgilio Garci.
Ano katagal nyo na-monitor si former Commissioner Garciliano?
Matagal din mula nang mag-umpisa yung Project Lighthouse. Nung una nga hindi namin alam na yung sinasabing Garci, yun na pala si Atty. Virgilio Garciliano.
So, paano nyo nalaman na yung minomonitor yung personality na yun, target na yun, si Garciliano yun?
Sa tagal din ng pag-monitor namin na nanggagaling sa mga tawag, minsan may tumawag sa cellphone niya na kung pwede makausap si Commissioner Virgilio Garciliano.
Okay. So, sino-sino naman ang nakausap nito ni Garciliano na monitor nyo?
Yan na nga, nang nagulat kaming lahat nang tumawag si Pangulong Arroyo kay Virgilio Garciliano na ang tinatanong niya ay yung tungkol sa dagdag na 1 milyon.
So, ibig sabihin, kayo rin nakamonitor nung conversation ni Presidente Arroyo at ni Garciliano?
Opo.
So, ikaw ba mismo ang nakarinig dun sa conversation na yun?
Opo, dahil nung that time, ang team po namin ang duty.
Okay. Pagkatapos nyo na-monitor itong mga conversations na to, anong ginagawa nyo sa Lighthouse?
Bali, nire-record po namin yan at ibinibigay kay Captain Ribong.
So, lahat ng recorded conversations na kay Captain Ribong lahat? Ano ba yun?
Hindi po. Bali, naiiwan sa amin yung tinatawag na master tape.
So, bukod dun sa binigay nyo kay Captain Ribong, may mga master tapes din kayong hawak.
Opo.
Saan naman napunta yung mga master tapes na yun?
Yun nga po, bali yung 4 po sa master tape ay naibigay ko kay Lito Santiago na tauhan ni dating NBI Deputy Director Samuel Ong.
Okay, pagkatapos mo binigay yung mga master tapes na yan kay Lito Santiago, anong nangyari?
Yun na nga po, dumiretso na po kami sa San Carlos Seminary sa Makati.
So kasama ka noon ni Attorney Samuel Ong sa San Carlos Seminary noong mga panahon na yun?
Opo.
Anong ginawa ni Attorney Ong doon na nandun kayo sa San Carlos Seminary?
Bali, nagpatawag siya ng press con sa mga media para ibunyag nga yung sinasabing Garci tapes.
So kasama ka ba doon sa mga nagbunyag tungkol doon sa Garci tapes?
Ako po yung nagbigay kay Lito ng mga tapes.
Pagkatapos doon sa San Carlos Seminary, ano na nangyari?
Yun na nga po, sinundo po ako ni Bishop Socrates Villegas.
At saan naman kayo pumunta ni Bishop?
Bali, dinala niya ako sa Camp Aguinaldo sa quarters ng dating Chief of Staff na si General Abu.
So pumunta kayo sa quarters ni General Abu.
Opo.
Anong ginawa niyo ron?
Doon ko na nga po nakita yung 2 anak ko at yung misis ko na nandun sila naka-detain sa basement ng quarters ni General Abu.
So, ibig mong sabihin, kinulong ng AFP sa quarters ni General Abu yung pamilya mo noong panahon na yun?
Yun nakita ko nang dalhin ako doon ni Bishop Villegas.
Okay, so ano nangyari pagtapos nung sila nalaman mo na nakakulong dun sa quarters na yun?
Yun na nga po, hindi na po natuloy yung dapat kong pagbunyag tungkol sa Garci tape.
Dahil nakakulong yung pamilya mo?
Opo.
Anong kinulong yung pamilya? Ikaw, ano naman nangyari sa'yo? Saan ka napunta?
Bali, ibinalik po kami sa ISAP kasama ang pamilya ko.
At gano'ng katagal naman kayo naka-custody sa ISAP?
Bali, ang pamilya ko ay nasa custody ng ISAP mula June 2005 hanggang April of 2006. At samantalang ako ay June 2005 hanggang ma-discharge. Ito lang, February 2007.
Bakit ka na-discharge sa ISAP, Sir Doble?
Dahil hindi na po ako nag-re-enlist at muling mapabil.
So, si decision mo na hindi ka na magpa-enlist sa ISAP?
Opo.
Okay. So, sa ngayon, bakit ka lumalabas? 2 taon na, no? From the last time nagkaroon itong issue tungkol sa Garci tapes. 2 taon na yung nakaraan. Bakit ngayon ka lumalabas tungkol dito?
Dahil nakita ko pa rin itong nakaraang May 14, 2007 election na ganun pa rin ang dayaan walang pinagbago mula nung lumabas yung May 14 na presidential election na nagkaroon ng dayan.
Mr. President, with the permission of the...
Sabi nila, peke daw yung Garci tapes sa Doble. Totoo ba yun?
May we know who is
Hindi po, tunay po ang Garci tape.
May we
With the
know
permission of Senator Lacson.
Gusto nila kaya kung patunayan yan.
Yung
whose
Garci
voice
tapes
is
may
the
mga
one
boses
asking
na
question?
naririnig dun sa background. Sino yung mga yun?
I will answer the question during the
mga
interpellation
kasamahan ko.
period.
No,
Mr.
I think it's a matter of
So yung mga
privilege.
nag-a-annotate
We
sa
are
background ng
entitled
Garci
to
tapes,
know
puro
the
mga
person
taga-Mig 21
asking
yun.
the question because
Ikaw ba
evidently we are now
rin?
conducting a
Meron
trial here
Meron
without...
din. Kung papakinggan mo
it's a
ulit
question
yung
and
Garci
answer.
tapes, makikilala mo ba yung mga tao
What voice
na,
is that?
mga nasa likod
It's
ng
the
mga
voice of a
boses?
lawyer, Mr. President.
Kilala
Who
po
is
lahat.
this lawyer?
Attorney
Voluntary mo ba?
Abisado.
Hindi ka ba natatakot? Voluntary mo ba
First name,
sinasabi
please.
ito lahat?
Alex Abisado,
Sinasabi
Mr.
mo.
President.
Thank you.
Wala na akong dapat ikatakot dahil civilian na ako para matapos na tong issue na to na bumabagabag sa kalooban ko.
Mr. President, esteemed members of this Senate of the People of the Philippines, this is extremely alarming that elements of the intelligence service armed forces of the Philippines could eavesdrop with ease on the conversations of whomsoever they choose or whomsoever they are ordered to spy upon. The targets of Project Lighthouse were not terrorists by any stretch of its definition. In any case, Congress had not yet passed any anti-terrorism law at the time of the commission of these crimes. The intelligence project itself is a paradox, for it was not the lighthouse that we know. It was the lighthouse that brought darkness into this benighted land. But not only had the ISAF been ordered to do its dastardly deed, no less than the leadership of the armed forces of the Philippines became party to covering up for the crimes they committed by threatening vital witnesses who sought to tell the truth. Again, with your indulgence, Mr. President, let me present in graphic form how the objects of their spying desire had been eavesdropped upon, how Project Lighthouse went about like a big brother listening to and recording the conversations between little sister and an elections commissioner named Virgilio Garciliano. This representation would have wanted to present a live wiretap demonstration before the chamber, but for RA 4200, the Anti-Wiretapping Act. Besides, I would need the assistance of a telecom service provider. Notice how their technique is as simple as it is fraught with the most fearful of implications. What is frightening, Mr. President, is the reality that we have all remained vulnerable while using any type of telecommunications equipment. It only takes a service provider willing to cooperate and conspire with whoever has knowledge in basic electronic surveillance. The following is a four-step procedure on how Hello Garci was tapped and taped. Step 1, Mr. President, a cell phone conversation is coursed through the cell site of the service provider. Since Garci's cell phone was the one of the objects of wiretap as per Project Lighthouse, any conversation involving the use of his cell phone would, as a matter of course, trigger the nearest cell site. Step 2, the service provider splits the signal and relays it to a cell phone unit that can record voice calls. In this case, a Nokia 3600. Following the principle of a cloned cell phone, it was at this point when the service provider would intervene by intercepting and splitting the voice signals of Garci and whoever was involved in the cell phone conversation with him, then relay the same real-time to the Nokia 3600 cell phone in the possession of the ISAP operatives right inside the office of MiG-21 or Military Intelligence Group 21 also known as the Technical Intelligence Group of ISAF. Step 3. The conversation is recorded as a digital file to the duplicate cell phone's memory card and is transferred to a computer. This procedure bears the crudeness of the operation, Mr. President. According to Vidal Doble, they had to hastily remove the memory card from the duplicate cell phone, transfer the stored data to a computer, then quickly return the same memory card back into the Nokia 3600 unit as they might miss recording any incoming or outgoing calls. And the last, step 4, Mr. President, the file is then transferred to a cassette, compact disc, or other media, in this case, a cassette tape. And there we go, Mr. President. We have the infamous and notorious Hello Garci tapes. Now that we all know how simple a cell phone wiretap operation is being undertaken, isang simpleng payo lamang ang maibabahagi ko sa inyong lahat. Kung may gagawin kayong kalokohan, tulad ng kumpare kong Senador Bong Revilla Jr. at Senador Lito Lapid, mabuti pang personal nyo na lang kausapin ang inyong kinalulukuhan. Levity aside, Mr. President, we are indebted to Mr. Vidal Doble Jr. for finally surfacing to give us the truth about how Project Lighthouse brought the nation into the dark, applying clandestine acts to achieve sinister ends. Although he was prevented by fear for his safety and that of his family, who were virtually kidnapped by the armed forces of the Philippines, detained at the basement of the quarters of the then Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, General Efren Abu, and altogether detained for years in its restrictive custody, he has now come to bear the truth, so that the Senate investigations into the farce that was the elections of 2004 can be put to its closure. It comes at a time when the institution that has been entrusted by the people and the Constitution to guarantee clean, honest, and orderly elections, indeed to guarantee the fundamental rights of people in a democracy to freely choose their leaders, has once again failed miserably in the recently concluded 2007 midterm elections. When will they ever learn, Mr. President? Maybe the better question is, will they ever change? The characters mentioned in the Hello Garci tapes of 2005 have not been subjected to any proper investigation, much less by the Comelec itself. They have not been prosecuted for crimes against the sovereign electorate. In fact, they have remained in the woodwork of the Commission on Elections. Not only that, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, some of them have been promoted or reshuffled, the better to ensure that elections will remain unclean, dishonest, and incredible. Thus, we saw the spectacle of Lintang Bidol obfuscating and lying in an attempt to explain away the cheating. We have seen how votes were padded by Provincial Election Supervisor Lilian Radam in South Cotabato. And we have seen how the special elections in Lanao del Sur would have been fabricated shamelessly had it not been for the alertness of the media people and PPCRB volunteers. We wondered how a character straight out of Hello Garci, a Ray Sumalipaw from Lanao, was promoted from Provincial Election Supervisor to Regional Director after being implicated in the Hello Garci controversy. If Doble had been allowed to validate the truth behind Hello Garci in 2005, would the likes of Maguindanao Provincial Election Supervisor Lintang Bidol still exist in the roles of the Commission on Elections? Dahil hindi nabigyan ng pagkakataon noon si Doble na maibunyag ang katotohanan, nakuha pa ring linlangin ni Lintang Vidal at ng kanyang mga kauri sa Comelec ang sambayanan nitong nakaraang halalan. Makakita pa kaya tayo ng malinis na sistema ng halalan sa loob ng nag-iisang buhay nating ito sa balat ng mundo? Kailan pa magkakaroon ng ang sambayanan ng tunay na pag-asa na ang karapatang pumili ng mga namumuno sa kanila ay hindi dadaanin sa pag-iimbot ng iilang may maitim na budhi at halang ang kaluluwa? Will we ever see a Comelec that knows how to count the truth, Mr. President? I am posing this challenge to Commissioner Rene Sarmiento, who more than a month ago, with all noise and bravado, called for the reopening of the Hello Garci controversy. Mr. Commissioner, I am telling you now, we have Exhibit A in the person of Vidal Doble Jr. I challenge you to make good on your promise. Hopefully, with your declared resolve, you could be instrumental in redeeming the Comelec from its present image as a cheating machinery into a true guardian of democracy. Something else deeply troubles this humble representation, Mr. President. What ought to be the noble profession of arms to protect the sovereign people has been so debased by the political leadership into becoming an instrument to thwart that sovereign will and destroy the institutions of that same democracy that the soldiers of the Filipino people are sworn to uphold. Truly, nothing could be darker. Nothing could be more sinister. It is in quest of this elusive imperative that we in the Senate must vow never again to allow cheating in future elections. And it is in quest of this elusive imperative that we must realize how Project Lighthouse brought our politics into abysmal depths of darkness. With full knowledge, we should then see to it that those who must be charged should get their just deserts. And this abomination of electoral cheating must never again be the lay of the land. Mr. President, I respectfully move that the Committee on National Defense and Security, which in the previous Congress had been prevented by a conspiracy of silence and double dealing from ferreting out the truth on this dark episode in our political history, now resume its investigation in this 14th Congress. Mr. Vidal Doble Jr. has assured me that he would attend if summoned, and I humbly ask the committee to summon the various other persons who together constituted the cast of characters in this privileged speech, including but not limited to retired General Efren Abu, former Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces, Bishop Socrates Villegas, Colonel Paul Somayo, Captain Frederick, Windel Rebong, and all the members of the team that implemented Project Lighthouse. I dare Malacanang to invoke the constitutionally infirm EO 464 given the recent Supreme Court ruling. Madam President Gloria Arroyo, your Memo Circular 108 has no basis in law. I challenge Malacanang to allow the truth to prevail for a change. The Filipino people deserve nothing less. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Nuile. I'm not going to interpolate, Mr. President, but I would like to request that a copy of the privileged speech of the distinguished senator, including the presentations, be given to each member of the Senate for study.
I will, Mr. President.
Okay. We will do that, Senator Nuile. Majority Leader, Senator Escudero.
Mr. President, I would like to congratulate the distinguished Senator, Senator Lacson. I will also not interpolate. May I just recommend and suggest that we likewise invite the telecom companies he mentioned a while ago, which played a vital role insofar as consummating this particular dastardly act is concerned. Unless there is a particular telecom company, then we invite perhaps all those providers that are involved in this particular service.
I would like to hear from Mr. Doble which service provider was involved in that wiretap operations, Mr. President. So I would suggest that we invite first Mr. Vidal Doble, and from him we will get, or we will know which service provider was involved.
I yield to the wisdom of the Honorable Senator, Mr. President, and I support his privileged speech and his inquiry. Thank you.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, there are no other reservations for interpellation on the privileged speech of Senator Lacson. I move that we refer the same to the Committee on National Defense and Security.
Any objection? Hearing. Senator Gordon.
Mr. President, I heard that this matter that was just exposed by the distinguished gentleman from Cavite involved the Commission on Elections. That being the case, I'm wondering why this is being referred to the Committee on National Defense. The personalities may be military, but the crime is against
Comelec.
the election system of the country.
I have no
Senator
objection,
Lacson.
Mr. President. I just moved to refer it to the Committee on Defense since they were the ones who started the investigation on the wiretap controversy. But since the electoral process was also mentioned, then I yield to the desire of the chairman of the Committee on Electoral Reforms.
It is not my desire, Mr. President, but what is in the rules. This matter involves the conduct of elections, which have been obviously appears to have been thwarted by the expose or by the statements made here. And I feel that if you give it to the Committee on National Defense, well, fine. If you're investigating the military officers and with so that we could fix up the military, fine. But if we're going to try and fix, as Senator Lacson stated earlier, the electoral system, then it should be referred to the proper committee.
I yield to the wisdom of the chair, Mr. President, and our
Majority Leader.
colleagues, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, before we act on the referral,
Senator Biason, Senator Enrile, Senator Biason.
I just want to react to the claim of jurisdiction of the various committees. If there was any crime committed, Mr. President, it could have been committed only with the use of a public service. So, since the instrument used for this purpose involved communication, may it not be proper to refer this to the Committee on Public Service?
Senator Biason.
Mr. President, yes. Mr. President, after the EO 464 was invoked, the Committee on National Defense thought that anyway, the job of the committee was done. In aid of legislation, Mr. President, those hearings led to the filing of two bills, proposed laws. The first was proposing for the control and regulation of sales, purchase, ownership or possession, and use of wiretapping equipment. Because some of our laws allow for the introduction into court as evidence wiretap materials. A very good example of this is the anti-money laundering law. That law allows for the introduction of wiretap materials as evidence. The only thing is, I think, Mr. President, we need to control the dispensation, the ownership, and the use of wiretapping equipment. And that proposed law came out as a consequence of the hearings conducted by your Committee on National Defense and Security, Mr. President. Now, the second proposed law that I filed coming out of that hearing was the law proposing for the prohibiting the armed forces of the Philippines to be ordered to perform election duties. So, as far as the national defense is concerned, I think, Mr. President, it may have accomplished its mission at that time. However, today, if we are focusing on different aspects of the whole affair, like we are raising the issue of violation of the election code, then I would agree with the gentleman from Olongapo that indeed, maybe the jurisdiction should fall under the that committee. Or if it is telecommunications that you are looking at, then it must fall under the jurisdiction of another committee. But be that as it may, Mr. President, the Committee on National Defense would, I would say, be designated as one of the secondary committees because there are still issues to be resolved which are under the concerns of that committee. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator Enrile.
Anyway, there is a motion pending. This representation merely made the suggestion. I think the motion has to be disposed. Since the investigation was started by the Committee Committee on Defense, I think it would be proper to let the matter rest in that committee. Thank you.
Mr. President.
Senator Escudero.
Baka meron din po isa sa mga binanggit ni Senator Lacson na hindi nagbayad ng buwis, the ways and means na rin ho. Kung pinag-aralan nila yon, alamin ho natin, Committee on Education na rin po. Kung yung electronic equipment nakasira ng kalikasan, the environment na rin po. The point I'm driving at, Mr. President, is perhaps may I suggest that this be referred to the committee, this be referred by way of a committee of the whole, with the Committee on National Defense as the lead committee insofar as the speech of Senator Lacson is concerned.
Any objection?
Mr. President, before we act on the motion, Mr. President, with the permission of our colleagues, we have, while we have undertaken proceedings by way of the Committee of the Whole, we would like to impress upon our colleagues that we have done so sparingly, Mr. President. Therefore, while I'm not objecting, Mr. President, to the issue of referring the same to the Committee of the Whole per se, may we allow the Committee on Rules, Mr. President, to first look into the matter and make its necessary recommendations, Mr. President. Give us a few days, Mr. President, perhaps by next week, Mr. President, Monday next week, we would have the recommendation.
Senator Lacson.
I'm keeping Vidal Doble in a safe house, Mr. President, and I think we should get it over with. We should summon him, schedule a hearing probably within the week, just to comply with the 3-day notice rule, and maybe we can just proceed. Because to prolong the agony of waiting for Mr. Doble to testify before the senators could be counterproductive, Mr. President.
May we have a minute suspension, Mr. President?
Suspended with the permission of our colleagues.
We would like to withdraw the motion to refer the privileged speech to the Committee on National Defense. And in its place, Mr. President, we would like to move to constitute the Senate to create a Committee of the Whole to tackle precisely the privileged speech of Senator Lacson. This is under Section 14, Rule 10 of our rules, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, may we have a minute suspension?
Session suspended.
Mr. President, under our rules, it's the Senate President that will preside, although in previous practices, Mr. President, the Senate President has allowed other committee members of the Committee of the Whole to preside. And therefore, we will be providing the notices at the soonest possible time for the convening of the Committee of the Whole, Mr. President, for the information of our colleagues.
Yes, noted. And Senator Biason.
Yes, Mr. President, parliamentary inquiry. Mr. President, the Defense Committee is in possession of all the testimonial evidence, physical evidence, and other documents in its possession. If the Committee of the Whole is going to be convened, the Senate is going to be convened, my first question is, would those pieces of evidence, documentary and physical, that was processed during the last Congress, Mr. President, will it still have the same value, or can be accepted, to include, Mr. President, the transcript of the records of the proceedings in those hearings, Mr. President?
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I would like to propose that the matter be formally introduced during the convening of the Committee of the Whole, Mr. President, so that the Committee of the Whole can act on the matter, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President. So, meaning the resource persons, for example, that had been invited that provided us these pieces of evidence, will they again be called to the proceedings?
Based on previous experiences, Mr. President, with respect to other committee hearings, Mr. President, this has been done, wherein witnesses have been again summoned to appear
The committee
before
then,
the Committee of the Whole.
the Committee of the Defense, of which I was given the privilege and honor of chairing of in the 13th Congress, Mr. President, will be turning over all of this to the Committee of the Whole.
That I would like to think, Mr. President, that would be the course of action when the Committee of the Whole constitutes itself, Mr. President, and convenes.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Thank you, Majority Leader.
we now we have now referred the privileged speech of Senator Lacson to the Committee of the Whole, Mr. President, which has been constituted, and notices will be therefore provided our colleagues. Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of the privileged speech of Senator Noynoy Aquino.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, Senator Madrigal wishes to interpellate Senator Aquino.
Senator Madrigal is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, in commemoration of the martyrdom of Senator Aquino, I wish to congratulate and thank the distinguished senator for delivering this speech, more significantly because it involves his father. Also because I remember very fondly the late Senator Aquino's visits to our house and the parties we used to have when I was a child. He was a good friend of my mother. And the last time I saw Senator Aquino was when we visited him in Harvard, just before he came back to the Philippines. In the privileged speech of the distinguished senator, he speaks about the torture and the extrajudicial killings, or as he refers to them, political killings under martial law. And it is staggering to realize that there were 35,000 torture victims and 70,000 illegal detention cases, and 3,257 cases of political killings. Would you compare this? How would you compare these political killings then with the extrajudicial killings now, Mr. President?
Well, first, I think we should compare it, Mr. President, with the extrajudicial killings in other countries that underwent, shall we say, a period similar to ours in terms of martial rule. The Philippines is far lower than Argentina's 8,000 missing, but it exceeded